And back to our top story. DOGE officially in session. The cost-cutting caucus holding its first PAC meeting on Capitol Hill today with lawmakers. Let's bring in DOGE Caucus founding member, Oklahoma Senator James Langford. Senator Langford, thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Good to see you all again.
So give us the opening prognosis for how you think this the DOGE process is going to work.
We are excited about it, to tell you the truth on it. Many of us that have worked on government efficiency for years are pleased to be able to say, let's get on with this and let's try to resolve it. So we've got stacks of ideas that many of us have worked on for a long time on making all of our government programs, our hiring, our systems a lot more efficient. And what we're trying to do now is separate out what can be done with executive action, what has to be done with legislation. Let's figure out which part goes where and let everybody get your job and start going after it.
Senator, it seems like so many Republicans are on board with this now. But all the ideas that you've been talking about for a long time, why weren't your fellow party members so jazzed about it years ago? Like, the two bills that you've introduced are about unemployment fraud and COVID fraud. Didn't your fellow Republicans care about fraud 2 years ago?
They do, but quite frankly, it's just not all that sexy to be able to work on government efficiency. There's stuff that people talk about all the time, and now suddenly when people are talking about how to make government more efficient, we got a lot of folks that are turning their attention to it. For those of us that have worked on this a long time, it's nerdy work, quite frankly. You got to be able to dig in to an agency and a program. You can't just say, let's cut off a program. I talk about it all the time. The State Department a couple of years ago did a grant to pay for drag shows in Ecuador. Right. Okay, everybody can look at that and go, that's crazy spending, but you've got to ask the question behind it. That is, how did that happen? What program, what was set up? Who gave permission for that? How do we actually change that process? That's where it just gets into nerdy digging into the legislative task work. And that's not as much fun to do, quite frankly. But the end results of that is we actually make a government that's inefficient more efficient. Yeah. I've said for years, we put out, as you know, the federal fumble book every year. I've said for years, every single office should do this. This shouldn't be a partisan thing. Everybody hates inefficiency. Everybody go look for inefficiency, pull the ideas together, and let's make the whole system better.
That's such a great word for it. It is nerdy work, and it's hard work, and you have to go through miles and miles of federal regulations to find all of this stuff, obviously. But, you know, what can be done? You know, what are the problems? Once you fix a problem with the federal government, as soon as you turn around, all the same rats start circling the drain and start figuring out some way to return the problem to the center of things. How do you fix it so that we don't wind up back in this situation, assuming that we actually do manage to get rid of some of the waste, fraud, and abuse?
So I have to tell you, let me give you the good news, bad news of that. Cleaning up government inefficiency is kind of like cleaning up after breakfast. Lunch is about to come. You're about to have to do this again. Then you're going to have to do it at dinner again. So it's never going to stop. Government is never going to be the most efficient entity. Okay, universities and government, they're never going to be efficient. They're never going to be as efficient as a family or a business is. But you've got to stay vigilant on and create an environment that you're always watching for it. Because when bloat comes, you either ignore it and let it happen and then it grows, or you go after it. So trying to create a mentality to say, we're just going to go after it, go after it, go after it. When you have $36 trillion in total debt, we should be asking the question, how do we spend less and actually be more efficient, do what government's supposed to do and not do what government's not supposed to do and not waste money there? That should be a straightforward question.
I just think that you're being, Senator, very kind to it's not just fellow Republicans, it's also Democrats, that it's just the idea that I'm too sexy for efficiency. No, it's because that they benefit from the fat. They benefit from the fiscal and financial recklessness that is government.
It's a whole lot easier to say. Yeah, it's a lot easier to say yes than no. When you have to say no, people get mad at you on it. So you just say yes. Yes, we're going to spend on that. Yes, we're going to spend on that. Yes, we're going to spend on that. And then everybody likes you and everybody cheers you. But at some point, you've got to say, no, we don't have that money. We don't have it. And so we got to say no to those things. That's not fun.
So, you know, one of the things that one of my benchmark rules for putting somebody in charge of an agency is whether the person that you put in charge of that agency is going to leave that agency and then go and make a fortune after leaving the agency, working for all of the companies and corporations that his agency oversaw. Obviously, RFK Jr. is probably one of those people who is not going to leave HHS and go get a job in the private sector with a company that he was overseeing. I think you met with him today. How did those meetings go?
I did. I don't anticipate that RFK Jr. is going to leave HHS and go work for Big Pharma. No, I don't anticipate that in the days ahead. My meeting actually went very well. We had lots of questions. Obviously, he's been very open. He's been a presidential candidate. He's had lots of comments in his lifetime that are very, very public. And so we got a chance to be able to talk about some of them. For instance, President Trump, in his first administration, HHS was a very pro-life entity. They were very aggressive to be able to deal with. We're going to get government out of the abortion business, and American taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for that anywhere, doing anything on it. Well, Biden flipped all that, and they're aggressively trying to find every way they can to advance abortion. One of my questions is, how are you going to turn that back? And he's made a lot of statements in the past, coming from his background, being more pro-choice. He was pretty clear with me today to be able to say President Trump has told him, I'm pro-life, and I want to be able to have HHS function as it did in the past on these life issues. Well, that's great because we want to be able to have a government that's not funding the taking of human life. So that's part of our conversation. We talked about drug development, innovation. He wants a more efficient innovation, which we all do for drugs. We don't want to inefficient and make drugs cost even more because of a bad, long, expensive process in the clinical trials. Let's do clinical trials on safety and effectiveness, but find a way to be able to do it as inexpensive and efficient as possible so the price of drugs can come down. So those are all good, positive things in that. And we had a great conversation today.
And he came out and said that he stands by the polio vaccine. Senator, do you anticipate what are going to be the biggest hurdles for Bobby Kennedy?
I think it's going to be just the number of statements that he's made on different things. When he's talked about vaccines, people are going to ask about it. Say, you've said 3 different things on different vaccines. You said 3 different things on what the function of NIH is. Where are you on these things? And try to be able to get him nailed down on that, and then for him to be able to align with where he's in the president. That's not a pejorative of him. He listens to a lot of people. He's like President Trump, that President Trump speaks his mind and is very stream of conscious as he talks about it. But if you line up every one of President Trump's statements on it, you'll say it looks like you actually say 2 different things on it, when he's not actually. He's talking to different groups about different topics and different contexts. So that's going to be where one of the biggest challenges in for him. It is funny the number of people say he hasn't been involved in healthcare on that. I look at Javier Becerra, that's running HHS now. He's a lifelong attorney, had no medical background at all, but it seems like no one on the left complained about him leading HHS when he's a lifelong attorney on it. So people that are trying to be able to say he hasn't involved in all these healthcare issues, that's just a smokescreen for a disagreement.
Right. Kind of like Donald Trump. The great thing about RFK Jr. is that he is pretty unfiltered. The big problem with RFK Jr. is that he's been pretty unfiltered. So it's going to go cut both ways. But on the good side of it is President Trump is going to be president. And so obviously every single one of these nominees to run cabinets are going to be carrying water for the guy that got elected, which is also kind of how the process works here in Washington, or at least it's supposed to work that way.
That is the way it's supposed to work, and President Trump is clearly picking people he knows are going to be loyal, knows are going to be passionate, and know are coming as a disruptor. He knows the clock is ticking literally when he's sworn in on January the 20th. He's got 4 years to get this done. And so for him, it's let's get busy immediately, and he doesn't want to have people that are status quo. He wants to put in disruptors and say, let's fix the problem.
The border bill, Senator, that you worked on last year was a flop. That's my word. But what do you anticipate with securing the border now that Republicans will do as they control not just the House, but the Senate and the executive branch? Will the major actions happen with executive order right out the gate because of President Trump?
So I think there'll be 3 things that have to happen. There'll be a lot of executive actions where the president's saying, Biden ignored the law. I'm not going to. I'm going to enforce the law. And I think Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem, you've got lots of folks that are already focused on the task. What are you going to do to be able to fix this? They'll be able to do a lot with enforcing the law. Second thing that will come up will be reconciliation bill. We'll do pretty quickly. That is adding funding to wall construction, adding funding for additional staffing, adding funds for additional deportation flights. Those are things we can do with dollars and a simple 51. Then we've still got to do the legislative work. Half of the bill that I actually brought, what you were talking about before, half the bill was fixing the asylum loophole that exists. That can only be done with an act of Congress. This is an issue. Right now, if you cross the border, you ask for asylum, you've got to go through this long, lengthy process to be able to find out you don't actually qualify. We've got to fix that in statute on that still. So that, I think, will come at some point. We'll be able to resolve that. By the way, the other half of the bill was trying to be able to actually force Biden to do his job. That part of the bill is not needed anymore. Trump's going to do his job. So I'm not worried about that. But that asylum definition, that is one we're going to have to fix in statute.
Senator Langford, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Good to see you all again.
Great to see you.